Before Rotvar set his foot upon the stone, the water had already recognized him, not by name, nor by face, but by weight. The slow, deliberate weight of a man who had died and returned, not to reclaim anything, but to see if the world still remembered how to breathe. The sea was quieter than he remembered. Not calm, never calm, but quiet in a way that felt watched. As if something below the surface was waiting, not to strike, but to bear witness. The tide reached for his boots like a child unsure whether to embrace a stranger. He didn't move. Behind him, the path was moss-covered and old, yet not overgrown. The stones were the same. The tree with the split trunk was still crooked, still bleeding resin that smelled of his youth. Time had passed here, but it had not moved forward. It had circled, waited. Rotvar exhaled, and the mist accepted his breath. The sky above, heavy with gray silence, neither threatened nor welcomed. It simply existed, vast and unwilling to answer. He wore no armor, no mark of title or triumph. His cloak was patched, his boots soaked. His left hand trembled slightly from an old wound that still remembered the heat of betrayal. In his right, a carved wooden object, not a weapon, but a token. The kind of thing only children or madmen carry for protection. He looked out over the edge of the cliff. Far below, something vast moved under the water. Not a creature, but a shift, a murmur of stone deep beneath the waves. A sound that had no voice, but could still be heard in the bones. Rotvar did not flinch. He had followed ghosts before. This was not home anymore, but it had been. And something in the rocks remembered him. The wind that passed over his shoulder did not push, it touched. And that, more than any storm, unnerved him. He took a step. The sound it made was not that of a foot on stone, but of something awakening. He felt it in his ribs first, a low, ringing pressure. Not pain, not warning. Just presence. He knew this land. But now it looked back. The village stood like a story told too often, familiar, worn, and full of holes no one dared to patch. Roofs sagged under the weight of seasons. The fences leaned like old men who no longer lied about their strength. No smoke, no dogs, no voices, but Rotvar walked anyway. Every step he took drew silence out of the earth like a thread, as if the soil itself was holding its breath, as if the ground remembered who he was not as a name, but as a rhythm, a pattern, a returning storm. By the time he reached the gate broken, leaning, still half carved with the runes of his forebears, his shadow had lengthened unnaturally. The sun wasn't low, and yet behind him the ground stretched it wide, like a memory too large to carry. A child's doll sat in the mud, its face half buried. A goat's skull rested on the threshold of the long hall. On the door, a circle had been etched, not drawn, not painted, etched with something sharp. Around it symbols he didn't know. Not old runes, something older. Rotvar stood still. The wind behind him stopped. He stepped through the gate, and the world changed pitch. Part 2, the empty hall remembers differently. The long hall was darker than the sky outside, though the door remained wide open. Light poured in, but it reached only a few steps past the threshold before retreating as if repelled by something deeper within. Rotvar did not hesitate. He had walked into darker places, into men's eyes after betrayal, into the mouths of dying gods. He knew this kind of dark. It did not frighten him, but it did ask something of him. His boots sank slightly into the damp earth floor. No fire had burned here in seasons, yet the air was warm, not with heat, but with breath, as if someone had just exhaled and stepped aside. The walls, once covered in the carved tales of ancestors and hunts, were scorched, smeared with blackened soot, as if time itself had tried to erase what was written. But not all of it had vanished. In the far back corner, a line of red symbols, not blood, but a pigment that pulsed faintly in the dim, curled like a serpent across the beams. The language was not one he knew, but its meaning crawled under his skin all the same. Return is not return. The earth does not forget. The name is the weight. He blinked. The words remained. A table lay overturned near the hearth, bones scattered beside it, not human, but close. A cloak was pinned to the wall by a rusted blade. A child's handprint, small and gray with ash, marked the ceiling beam above the doorway. He moved deeper in. Every step brought a creak, not from the wood, but from the very space around him, as though the hall adjusted itself to him. He paused. In the silence there was not silence. Beneath it something steady. A heartbeat, not his. A rhythm, slow and heavy, like earth shifting in its sleep. It came from below. He knelt, pressed his palm to the ground. Soil, dry just an hour ago, was damp. Warm, breathing. He could feel the pulse not through his hand, but in the back of his neck, the weight of old promises stirring. Someone had buried something here. Or someone. He stood slowly, looked once more at the etched circle on the door from the inside, and realized it was not a warding mark. It was a seal, a promise, a memory locked in wood and time and forgetting. The sound of a rope twisting overhead made him turn. Nothing there, but the beam still swayed slightly, as though something had just let go. Rotvar closed his eyes. He saw a woman standing where he now stood tall, strong-backed, with eyes that did not blink even as fire took her hair. She was holding a small bundle, singing without sound. Around her, others knelt, not out of worship, but grief. And then the hall was empty again. He opened his eyes. Stillness. The past did not scream here. It whispered, constantly. So much so that silence became its own kind of scream. He exited the hall not because he wished to leave, but because the wind outside had begun to move again. And it carried with it a smell, burnt pine, wet iron, and something faintly floral, like a flower that bloomed only beneath snow. He turned toward the well. It was still there, cracked at the rim. The rope had rotted to string, but the water had risen, as if it knew he'd come. In the surface, his reflection, but not only his. A second figure stood just behind, not visible when he turned. Only in the water, a man, tall, robed in something torn from the sky itself, face obscured by a hood of ash. The figure did not move. Rotvar did not blink. In the reflection, the figure raised its hand and pointed not at him, but at the woods behind the village, where the trees had grown too fast, too close, as if hiding something they could not bear to reveal. The trees had always been close to the village, but never like this. What once was a clearing between homes and forest now breathed like a throat. Trunks leaned together at impossible angles. Bark split as if from pressure within, and moss coated everything with a slick, green silence. Branches curved not upward, but inward, like ribs forming a cage. The forest had not grown wild, it had grown deliberate. Rotvar stepped toward it. The figure in the well's reflection was gone, but its gesture remained imprinted in his chest like the residue of thunder. He passed the edge where grass stopped growing. The air shifted, warmer, wetter. The silence here was thicker than inside the long hall, and deeper. Birds did not sing. No twigs cracked underfoot. Even his breath felt distant, muffled, as though the forest did not want sound, only presence. He placed a hand on one of the twisted trunks. It pulsed, not with life, but memory. He pulled his hand away and found a smear of crimson on his palm, not sap. Not blood, something older. He moved forward, the path, if it could still be called that, narrowed to a corridor of leaning trees, their roots interwoven like knuckles in prayer. Light dimmed not from leaves but from a haze that seemed to bleed from the bark itself, a fog with no source, hanging low and intelligent. Then came the hum. At first, it was easy to mistake it for wind, but it had pitch, rhythm. It moved like language, not weather. It spoke without words, without direction. It just was. A vibration in his teeth, in his spine. He followed it. The path ended without warning, in a circle. The trees bent away here, forming a clearing that felt unnatural, too exact, too symmetrical, like something placed rather than grown. In the center stood a stone old, jagged, taller than a man, marked in a spiral of unfamiliar glyphs, each carved with intent so deep the rock itself had bruised. Around it, bones, dozens, not scattered but placed carefully. Ritualistically, every skull faced inward, every rib cage open to the sky. Rotvar did not move. This was no burial site. It was a question. And the stone was waiting for an answer. He knelt beside one of the skulls. It was human. Female by its structure. Teeth worn. A faint crack across the top, not from age, but from impact. He placed a hand on the earth beside it. It was warm. He heard breathing. Not his. From beneath the soil, shallow. Rhythmic. Someone or something was beneath the surface. Not alive, not dead. Not yet awakened. He stood slowly. The hum intensified. And from behind the stone, something rose, not a figure, not a creature, but a shape made of shifting light and roots. Tall and thin like a flame that refused to flicker. It had no face, but it watched, and when it moved, the glyphs on the stone bled with light. Rotvar reached into his cloak, pulled out the wooden token, the one he'd carried since before he remembered why. It pulsed. The hum ceased. The trees shuddered. And then, for the first time since he had returned, a voice spoke. It came from everywhere and nowhere, deep and feminine, but not human. Soft, but cruel in its clarity. Why did you come back, Rotvar? He did not answer. Because he didn't know. Not yet. Rotvar stood in the center of the circle, the voice still trembling in the bark of the trees and the breath of the wind. It had asked a question simple in shape, vast in meaning. Why did you come back, Rotvar? But the forest did not wait for an answer. The shape of light and roots before him did not move. Yet the space around it rippled, as if the forest exhaled in expectation. The token in Rotvar's hand grew warm. He looked down at it. It was no longer a child's keepsake. Under his gaze, the smooth wood revealed something new. A spiral, shallow and fresh, forming slowly with each heartbeat. The same spiral carved into the standing stone. He had not made it, but it had waited for him. He gritted his jaw, stepping toward the figure of Rootlight. It didn't flinch. Neither did he. This land was mine, he said. And now, the voice returned. I walk it as a stranger. Now. The voice paused. Then good. The roots at the base of the standing stone twitched. Earth shifted. From behind Rotvar, the forest moved. Not wind, not branches, steps. He turned. Emerging from the trunks came shapes not entirely human, but close enough to disturb the boundary. Their skin was pale as ash, their eyes black, lips marked with spirals. Some carried staffs of bone, others blades of obsidian. They wore garments of woven bark, moss, and animal skin stitched with thread that shimmered like silvered hair. They stopped just beyond the circle. One stepped forward, an elder woman, though her back was straight and her stare sharp. Her face bore no emotion, but her presence bent the silence. She looked at Rotvar not with recognition, but with assessment, as if weighing not the man but his purpose. You carry what should not return, she said. And yet it did, Rotvar replied. Then it will be named. She raised a finger. The earth within the circle trembled. The stone pulsed once, a dull, red glow running through the glyphs like blood through ancient veins. Then came the sound, a long, low groan from beneath the ground, as if something vast had begun to shift after lifetimes of sleep. The hum returned, deeper, more resonant. Rotvar stumbled slightly as the token in his palm pulled him forward. The light shape moved aside, revealing the base of the standing stone cracked open. From the fracture, roots twisted upward, wrapped in strands of woven hair. The elder woman approached it, knelt, and placed her hand on the stone. This land remembers names long buried, she said. Names spoken once and paid for in silence. Rotvar dropped to one knee. Not in submission, but in balance, in alignment. His breath synced with the pulse of the ground. The spiral on the token deepened. Then speak it, he whispered. The elder nodded, and she did. A name rose from her mouth, a name older than the village, older than the language. It was not a sound, but a force. It echoed without echoing. A memory wrapped in syllables the bones could understand. The glyphs on the stone caught fire, not flame, but burning light. Rotvar felt it strike his chest. He gasped not from pain, but from remembering. He knew the name. He had carried it once. Not his father's. A name that had been erased not by death, but by choice. A name torn from the records, scratched from the walls, buried in a pit deeper than history. Rotvar fell forward, hands on the soil. The whisper of that name unraveled something in him. Not grief, not shame, but weight, the kind that shapes a spine over years. He rose slowly. The forest watched. The woman stood again. "You carry blood that lied," she said, "and truth that fled." "What do you ask of me?" he said. She stepped aside. "To walk until the soil knows you again." And without another word, the shapes retreated into the forest, fading. Not into darkness, but into the bark and mist, as if they had never been. Only the stone remained, and the name. Part 5, the road that doesn't know its end. The forest did not open for him. It only tolerated his passage. Rotvar moved with the name heavy in his chest, not spoken, not repeated, but etched into the rhythm of his breath. The glyphs had burned their shape into his memory, and though he did not understand them, he felt their presence like a wound that hummed in tune with the trees. His boots dragged the silence along. The path, if it was one, bent not through geography, but through meaning. Landmarks changed without moving. Stones reappeared. The trees shifted their posture when he wasn't looking. And once, the sky seemed to blink, but he kept walking. Because to stop felt like betrayal. He had been tasked not by the woman, nor the forest, but by the very weight of return. Some debts weren't asked for. They just waited until your shadow lengthened enough to cast them back. Rotvar passed under a gnarled arch of ash trees, their limbs intertwined like hands clinging to a secret. Beyond them lay an open stretch of frost-hardened soil. No birds, no wind, just the distant sound of dripping water, precise, deliberate. In the center of the clearing stood a cairn. It was not old, the stones were still sharp-edged. At its top sat a single feather, blackened by fire. He approached it slowly, bent down. The feather lifted with the windless air, hovered for a breath, and fell gently into his palm. It was warm. A sudden gust cut through the silence, not natural, not weather. It came from beneath. The cairn shifted. Stones collapsed inward with a dry, grinding sound. Beneath them, a pit. Shallow but lined with bones, antlers, claws, human fingers. He did not flinch. A voice called out, not from the pit. From the trees behind him, low, male, familiar. "You always take longer than you should." Rotvar turned slowly. A man leaned against the trunk of a split birch, tall, wiry, with skin like carved wood and eyes too young for his scars. He wore no armor, only a threadbare tunic and a string of teeth around his neck. "I watched you walk the wrong way. Thought you'd never see the path," the man said. Rotvar didn't move. "You speak as if we've met. We have. You just forget things that bleed." The stranger stepped forward. His gait was crooked, but controlled like a drunk who never falls. He stopped a few paces away. "You carry a name that should have drowned," he said. "And yet here you are, walking like it matters." Rotvar narrowed his eyes. "What are you?" The man smiled. "A reminder." He raised his left hand. The palm was tattooed a spiral, identical to the glyph on the token. Rotvar instinctively reached for it, but the man didn't let him. "You're not ready to know what it opens." The earth behind them cracked. From the pit, smoke rose, not fire, but something colder, denser. Memory turned vapor. Rotvar stepped toward it. The man did not stop him. "Just remember," he called after, "this road doesn't care if you finish it. It only cares that you walk." Rotvar looked back, but the man was gone. Only the tree remained. He descended into the pit. The smoke did not sting. It coated his throat like dust stirred from old parchment. It smelled of burnt pine, rusted iron, and birch sap. In the center, beneath the bones, a stone tablet. Flat, wide, covered in the spiral glyphs, but this time arranged in the shape of a tree. Its roots dug into nothing. Its branches bled into sky, and at its heart an empty space. Shaped like the token in Rotvar's hand. Rotvar knelt beside the tablet, The spiral-shaped tree etched into stone seemed to pulse, though no light came from it. The branches twisted upward toward nothing, their lines carved with trembling precision. Each root ended in a glyph, some he recognized from the standing stone. Others older, fragmented, as if borrowed from a language no longer spoken aloud. At the center, the hollow. It was not just a shape, it was a space that called to be filled. Rotvar's fingers tightened around the token in his hand. He looked down at it. Smooth wood, warm. The spiral still etched on its face, deeper now, breathing slightly with his pulse. It had always felt like a relic of memory, but now it was a key. Not to unlock, but to complete. He hesitated. Something in his chest resisted. Not fear, not doubt, cost. He felt it settle in his bones like cold water down the spine. The knowing that once the token entered that hollow, something in him would be named, and something unnamed would never return. Still, he placed it. The token fit perfectly. The tablet did not glow, or shake, or shatter. Instead, it sighed. A long, slow exhale that came not from air, but from stone and silence and memory itself. Rotvar stepped back. The glyphs on the roots lit one by one, not in fire, but in colorless light. The tree began to shimmer, the image deepening until it looked no longer like a carving, but a reflection. A mirror, and then it moved. Not the stone, the tree. From the center of the hollow, roots began to grow upward, real roots. Twisting from nothing, emerging into air. They broke the boundary of the tablet, and rose like veins searching for a pulse. Rotvar stepped away further. The roots expanded outward in a slow spiral, forming a miniature tree of white bark and black leaves. It grew silently. No tremor, no violence, just inevitability. At the base of the newly grown tree, a figure began to emerge. It did not crawl, it did not rise. It unfolded, piece by piece, like something remembered in the wrong order. A man, or the shape of one, bare-chested, skin pale as bone, hair matted with soil. His eyes were closed, his hands clenched, and on his chest carved directly into flesh was the same spiral as Rotvar's token. The figure did not move, but Rotvar knew it was alive, or becoming. He took a cautious step forward, and heard voices, not aloud, in him, a dozen, 100, all speaking in the same tone. Soft, measured, not asking, not accusing, naming. Words that tasted like smoke and cold metal. The cost of forgetting is not silence, it is return. The shape of your blood remembers what your mouth cannot. He is not your shadow, he is your debt. Rotvar dropped to one knee, not from pain, from weight. He looked at the figure beneath the tree. A second him? A brother he'd never met? A name made flesh? He did not know. But the tree knew, and it had already begun to bloom. Tiny black flowers opened along the branches, and each one bore a different symbol at its center. Not runes, faces, dozens of them. Children, elders, warriors, eyes open. Eyes shut, all staring into him. He stood, straightened his spine, and for the first time since returning, he spoke not as a man searching, but as a man found. Then let the road take me, he said, but I will name what walks beside me. The figure's eyes opened. They were his own. Part 7, the mirror that stands. They stood across from each other, man and mirror, though neither moved. The blooming tree between them no longer grew, but it breathed. Its black leaves shifted subtly without wind, the petals of its spectral blossoms whispering as they turned inward. The air around them thickened, not with threat, but with recognition. Rotvar studied the figure. It was him, undeniably. But not the him that stood here. This version bore no scar above the brow. No stiffness in the left shoulder, no weight in the gaze. It looked untouched. Not innocent, untested, the kind of man he might have been. Had fire never touched his home, had betrayal never carved itself across his family. But that man had never walked the night roads, never watched gods die in silence, never stood in villages that forgot their names. This one had no ashes under his fingernails. The reflection blinked. Rotvar's hands instinctively curled into fists. Then, the figure spoke. I waited. You were not called, Rotvar replied, and yet I remember what you do not. Memory does not make you true. The mirror version tilted its head. Nor does forgetting make you free. They stared at one another. A tension formed in the soil, subtle, like the feeling before lightning chooses where to strike. The tree responded. Its roots shifted slightly, parting the ground beneath the mirrored figure's feet. From below, a shape emerged, a blade, not steel, something older. It pulsed with the same lightless hue as the spiral glyphs. The mirror man reached down and took it. He did not raise it. He simply held it as if born knowing its weight. Rotvar did not flinch. He had no weapon, no armor, just the worn clothes, the cloak, and the carved emptiness left by what had been. Still, he stepped forward. The petals of the black tree quivered as he passed beneath them. The mirror did not move. Yet Rotvar felt its presence swell not in power, but in gravity. It pulled at him, not to attack, but to collapse the space between them. As if the forest demanded one self to remain, and the other to be buried. What are you? Rotvar asked. I am the name that was swallowed, the mirror said. And now? Now I am returned because you broke the seal. Rotvar's gaze fell to the token tree at the heart of the spiral. The hollow still burned faintly. He understood. This wasn't a ghost. This wasn't an enemy. This was inheritance. Something that could not be buried forever. The blade in the mirror's hand lifted slowly. Not with threat, but with finality. A ritual. One must walk, the mirror said. One must remain. Rotvar stepped forward once more. No fear, then choose, he said. The tree behind them bloomed violently, petals scattering like ash in reverse, sucked into the center. Wind howled not across the ground, but upward, into the hollow sky. The forest vanished from the edges. Only the two remained, man and his forgotten self. The blade rose. Rotvar closed his eyes and stepped into the strike. But there was no pain. No wound. Only silence. When he opened his eyes again, the mirror was gone. The blade rested in his hand, and the tree had turned to stone. At his feet, the hollow empty again. Above him, the black sky. Around him, a circle of standing figures, not real, not alive. Memories with shape, watching, and in his mind a new name. His name, not the one he had been given, but the one he had just earned. Part 8, The Ground That Watches. The blade in Rotvar's hand did not hum, did not whisper, did not burn, it simply was. It felt neither new nor ancient, but inevitable. As if forged not by smith, but by sentence. Its surface bore no metal shine, only a grain like petrified root. Where a hilt should be, a spiral had grown, winding upward into his grip. He stood for a long moment, surrounded by the statues, not men, memory made fleshless. They did not move, but their posture suggested presence. Witnesses, not participants. They did not judge, but they recorded. The stone tree behind him had cracked, its petals turned to dust. He stepped away. Each footfall felt louder now, as if the land had turned to echo. His breath, even shallow, seemed to stir the mist beyond the clearing's rim. The air wasn't heavier, he was, not tired, just weighted by something that had no mass. When he crossed the edge of the stone circle, the mist parted, and the world had changed, not in shape, but in behavior. The trees no longer leaned inward. They stood straighter, their bark drier. The wind moved naturally again, but still cautiously like it too. Remembered what had happened. Rotvar found the path with ease now. It revealed itself before his steps. Where he had wandered, he now walked with direction, but to where he didn't know. And that, strangely, no longer mattered. He followed the sound, not of drums, not of voices, but of breathing, the world itself inhaling. Ahead, a valley he had not seen before. Its shape curled like a sleeping creature. In the center, a mound, covered in pale grass and ringed with stones that glowed faintly in the dim. As he descended toward it, he noticed the ground shift under his boots. Not sink shift. The soil here was not passive, it pulsed beneath him. ever so slightly, like a throat under a whisper. He reached the center and knelt, not out of reverence, but because it called him to. The stones formed a broken circle, at its heart an indent, not deep, wide enough for a man to lie down, and someone had. The faint trace of a body remained, not corpse, not remains, a memory of shape. The grass bent inwards, like it had grown around someone who had once died and never rotted. Rotvar touched the soil, it was warm. He placed his palm against the indentation, and the world blinked. Everything went white, not from light, but from absence. And in that absence, a voice. No forest, no wind, just the voice. It was neither male nor female, neither near nor distant. You wear the face of two, it said, but walk the path of one. Will you walk it alone? Rotvar did not speak. He let the silence answer, then rise. He did. And when he opened his eyes, the world had returned, but the valley was gone. He stood in a long, narrow field, one he had never seen. The wind was colder here, the air smelled of salt, and ahead, in the distance, a village, not his, but waiting. The village looked ordinary, and that was its first lie. Low-roofed homes leaned into the wind like they'd been trained not to fall. Stone walls wrapped in thick rope moss. Thin smoke trailed from a single chimney, rising into the sky like it feared being noticed. No guards, no dogs, no chatter, just the hush of existence, careful, contained. Rotvar approached without disguise. He no longer walked as a man returning. He walked as something remembered. Children watched from behind half-closed doors. Old women paused mid-step. A man sharpening a blade stopped mid-drag and let the whetstone fall. None spoke, but all saw. He crossed the threshold between dirt path and central square. A well stood at its center, ringed by stones far too even, too deliberate. Not a functional circle, a marking. This, too, was a village with memory, and memory had teeth. From the side, a door creaked open. Out stepped a figure middle-aged, short-bearded, wrapped in furs too light for the season. His eyes were tired, but not afraid. He walked with a limp and held a short axe as if it were not a weapon, but an argument he was prepared to lose. He stopped several paces from Rotvar, spoke slowly. No one comes here without reason. Rotvar gave a small nod. Nor without cost. The man narrowed his eyes. Are you one of the marked? Rotvar reached into his cloak and pulled out the blade, the root-hilted spiral weapon that had no reflection. He did not raise it. He simply let it exist between them. A whisper ran through the windows. The man exhaled sharply. Then the ground truly woke. Rotvar looked beyond him past the homes, toward a rise in the land where 6 wooden poles stood, each bound with tattered cloth, offerings or warnings. He pointed. Who lies beyond? The man hesitated, then said, the ones who remembered too much. Rotvar stepped past him. The villagers did not move to stop him. They parted, not in deference, but in weary allowance like branches that bend before a storm they've seen before. At the top of the rise, the 6 poles stood in a circle. Each bore a symbol at its base etched in bone, tied with braided hair. Names, not written, contained. Rotvar placed his hand on the tallest. The wood sang beneath his palm, not sound, vibration. A memory locked in posture. And as he touched it, a vision flooded him. A woman kneeling in snow, whispering into a hollow tree. A man bearing a blade not in soil, but into his own shadow. Children dancing in silence around a ring of stones, mouths stitched shut with thread made from their own hair. A scream so old it no longer made sound. He staggered back, and the wind changed direction. He turned. Behind him, the man from the square had followed. What do you want here? He asked. Rotvar didn't answer at first, then said, to remember. The man looked down. No one here forgets. That's the curse. Part 10. When the ground remembers too loudly. Night fell without ceremony. No sun dipped, no colors shifted, just the slow dimming, as though a hand had covered the sky in cloth. The village grew quieter, not with sleep, but with tension. Doors closed, not from cold, but from knowing. Rotvar remained at the poles. He sat near the tallest, where the wood still pulsed. The vision hadn't faded, it had rooted. Each flicker of memory hummed beneath his skin. He didn't dream. The ground refused to let him. At some point, a woman approached. Elder. Barefoot, draped in woven ash-gray robes, marked with spirals drawn in soot. She did not speak until she sat. "You carry the blade," she said. Rotvar nodded. "And the cost." She turned her head, listening to something only she could hear. "It is not only memory that rises when a name is spoken." "I know," Rotvar said. "Do you?" "I felt it move, beneath the tree, beneath the well, beneath the pit. It has roots everywhere." Silence. Then she said, "They will come for it." "Who?" "The ones who kept the forgetting alive. They were never men. Only shapes given purpose, guardians of the silence." Rotvar's jaw clenched. He looked out over the sleeping village. Fires burned in hearths, but none outside. No one dared light a flame under open sky. "Will they come tonight?" "They are already here." Rotvar stood. The old woman did not. She placed her hand on the soil. "Beneath us, they move." He looked to the poles. Each one now vibrated slightly. The wind had stopped. A low sound filled the night, not a howl, not a chant. Something beneath those things. A groan stretched across distance, like stone grinding against itself in pain. Rotvar drew the blade. The spiral glowed faintly at its hilt, a dull silver, like moonlight wrapped in smoke. Then movement. From the farthest end of the village, just past the last home, the ground split. Silently. A seam of darkness opened, and from it crawled figures, long-limbed, bone-thin, flesh the color of soaked ash. Their mouths were sewn shut. Their eyes black with no reflection, no armor, no weapons, just motion. Dozens. They moved not in a run, but a procession, measured, inevitable. The villagers did not scream. They knew better. Rotvar stepped forward. The blade in his hand responded to the presence not with heat or hum, but with weight. As if pulled toward those that had once forged silence from violence, the old woman remained seated. "If they reach the poles, we vanish," she said. "Then they won't." He walked down the hill toward the advancing line. The earth trembled beneath his boots, not in fear, but in memory. As if recognizing a rhythm that had not been heard in generations. He did not wait for them to reach him. He ran, down the hill, into the dark. Into the mouths of the ones who had no breath. And when the blade struck the first, it made no sound. Only the wind, returning. Part 11, those who guard the silence. They did not scream. They did not breathe. But the earth shifted beneath them as they moved. Rotvar's boots pounded the ground as he ran. Cloak trailing like shadow behind flame. Ahead, the first of the creatures raised its head eyeless, mouth sewn shut with dark thread that pulsed like a vein. The moment it sensed him, it halted, and the rest followed. They did not need signals, they were one. He gripped the blade tighter, its spiral hilt now warm, responding to the presence of what should not walk the world. He didn't swing it, not yet. He stopped mere paces from them, face to face. The standoff lasted only seconds, but the weight of it slowed time to the pace of dripping blood. Then they moved, all at once, not as attackers, but as a tide, bodies folding, limbs bending backwards, crawling across the dirt like smoke given shape. The closest one leapt not with rage, but with silence. The kind that arrives after a scream is cut short. Rotvar struck. The blade did not slice, it undid. Where it touched the creature, sound collapsed. The being folded inward, not in pain, not in death, but like a name being erased mid-word. It vanished without blood, without trace, as if never known. The others hesitated, a breathless pause. Then faster. Rotvar turned with the spiral, moving in half circles. The weapon carving arcs in the air that shimmered like memory caught in flame. One by one, the creatures dissolved beneath it, not dying, but being forgotten. But they kept coming. Behind him, the villagers began to chant, low, wordless. The rhythm was old, older than the ground itself, and in it, the poles on the hill began to glow not with light, but with shape. Their glyphs rose like smoke into the sky. The silence resisted. Rotvar could feel it pressing inward, like fingers around his throat. The further he stepped into the mass of crawling bodies, the harder it became to exist, not to fight to remain. His memories blurred. Voices in his head began to fracture. Who were you? What did you leave? Why did you return? He bit his tongue until he tasted blood, the only thing that grounded him. Then he stopped. The blade hummed once, and he drove it deep into the earth. The spiral hilt vanished beneath the soil, and the ground shook. A sound erupted, but not from above, from below. 1,000 whispering mouths, all stitched shut, tearing open with soundless fury. Then came the rupture. The seam in the earth widened, and from its depth, a new form rose taller, wrapped in roots and bone, bearing no face, no eyes. Only the spiral branded across its entire torso. It towered over the others. They knelt in its presence. Rotvar backed away, breath sharp, blood still in his mouth. The villagers on the hill intensified their chant. The poles began to burn without fire. Their forms flickered like ghosts unbound from anchors. Glyphs rained down from the sky like ash that never touches the ground. The creature turned to Rotvar. It did not move, but it arrived inside him. A coldness that slid between his ribs and unspoke his name. He dropped to one knee. The earth beneath him cracked. You carry what was sealed, the voice said, but not aloud. You opened what cost generations to bind. You must finish what your blood began. Rotvar looked up, shaking. Then speak the name. The creature paused. Then in one motion it bowed. And as it did, the spiral across its chest collapsed into light. The silence shattered. The wind returned, screaming through the valley. The poles exploded into threads of memory, carried into the sky. The creatures dissolved into root and dust. Only the blade remained buried in soil, and Rotvar, kneeling, breathing, remembering. The sun did not rise, but light returned cautiously, like a guest unsure if they're still welcome. Rotvar stood slowly, his knees aching not from battle, but from bearing a silence that had tried to make him unmade. Around him, nothing remained of the creatures. No corpses, no bones. Only faint indentations in the soil, as if shadows had walked and then changed their minds. The blade was gone. Where it had been buried, the ground had sealed. Not violently, gently like a grave filled by unseen hands. The wind moved again. Real wind. Wild, scented with pine and ash. The kind of wind that reminded the lungs how to belong to a living man. From the hill, villagers began to descend slowly, uncertainly. The chanting had stopped, but the rhythm still lingered in their limbs. Each step carried the memory of survival, and a question none dared yet speak aloud. Rotvar met them halfway. The man with the limp arrived first, eyes wide, jaw tight. You broke it, he said. Rotvar shook his head. No, it broke itself. Behind the old woman approached. Her eyes shone not with light, but with something deeper recognition or grief. The silence has lifted, she said, for now. She stepped closer. Her hand reached for his chest not to strike or to test, just to feel. Her fingers paused over his ribs, then dropped. It did not take you. It tried, Rotvar answered. They all looked to the sealed ground where the blade had disappeared. The soil had hardened into something smooth, dark and circular, a new spiral. Etched by no hand, it pulsed faintly. Will it open again? The limping man asked. Rotvar looked to the sky, then to the poles, now gone. Only scorched grass remained where they had stood. Not soon, he said. But yes, one day. The woman nodded slowly. Then we must remember this day, and forget all others. Rotvar looked at her and for a moment saw the forest again, the stone tree, the mirror of himself. No, he said, you must remember everything. That is the only way it doesn't return stronger. A hush followed, but it was a different kind of silence now, not weight, but respect. Then came the birds. One by one, calls from the treetops. Uncertain, dissonant, but alive. The villagers turned their heads, some smiled through tears. Life had not ended. It had relearned how to sound. Rotvar stepped away from them, back toward the edge of the village. He did not wait for thanks. No one followed. Not out of rudeness, but understanding. They knew now what he was, what he carried, what he had walked through. At the village's edge, a child stood, no older than 8. She held something in her hands, a small wooden disc, carved roughly. A child's version of the spiral. She held it out to him. Rotvar paused. "You made this?" he asked. She nodded. "My grandfather said it keeps things asleep." Rotvar took it, looked at it, then down at her. "It does," he said. "But sometimes, things wake up because they want to be seen." She tilted her head. "So what do we do?" Rotvar smiled faintly. "We look at them. And don't look away." He turned, slipping the token into his belt, and walked onward past the last stone, the last fence, into the trees that still held breath, not toward home, because there was no home left, only the road. Rotvar walked until the trees no longer whispered his name, until the scent of smoke faded from his cloak, until his feet no longer pressed soil that remembered. The forest thinned. Hills opened like the backs of beasts, wide and rolling under pale clouds. The land stretched in long, slow breaths, not lifeless but untouched. It was not wilderness, it was pause. By the 3rd day, he no longer knew which direction he moved. Not north, not south, only forward. Guided not by stars or memory, but by something that had begun to grow inside him. A sense, a pressure behind the eyes, a sound he couldn't quite hear. The road had become aware of him. One morning, he woke to find stones arranged in a circle near his fire. Not his doing. No tracks, no scent, 7 stones. 7 different kinds of rock, none from the region he had passed through. One was wet, one pulsed with heat, one was carved faintly with a spiral. He did not touch them, only bowed his head and left them behind. By the 5th day, his dreams returned, but they were not his. He saw a woman standing in a river, holding a bundle of white cloth. The water turned black around her. Her mouth moved but made no sound. He saw a man with no eyes, carving symbols into the trunk of a dead tree with a broken tooth. He saw himself far ahead on a cliff, looking down not at a sea but a hole, endless and circular, with stairs that spiraled inward, lit from beneath. He woke sweating, his hand gripping the empty place where the blade used to rest. On the 7th day, he met another traveler. The man came from the east, cloaked, hooded, with a limp not of injury, but of design, as if walking wrongly on purpose. They did not greet one another. They sat near the same fire. Each stirred their own coals. Hours passed. Then the man spoke. "You're walking like something's following you." Rotvar said nothing. The man poked the fire with a stick. "Or maybe you're chasing it." Still, Rotvar remained silent. Then, "Do you know what waits at the edge of a forgotten name?" the man asked. Rotvar finally turned. "Wait." The stranger smiled crooked, knowing. Good answer. He pulled something from his satchel, a piece of bark, curled tightly like parchment. He handed it over. Rotvar took it without thanks, unrolled it. Inside a spiral, not carved, burned. But this spiral was incomplete, broken halfway through, interrupted by a diagonal slash. "What is this?" Rotvar asked. "A path that doesn't know it's a path," the man replied. "Some say it's a sign, some say it's a wound." Rotvar stared at it for a long while, then said, "What do you say?" The man leaned in. His eyes were black, not evil, not hollow, just deep. "I say you're almost there." And just like that, he stood. And was gone. Not in the usual sense, simply no longer present. Rotvar turned back to the fire, the bark still in hand, the broken spiral still warm. He looked out toward the horizon and saw something rise. Not a mountain, not a city, something else, tall, wide, with no clear shape, not built, but called. Part 14. The shape that called without voice. It did not rise like a mountain. It did not shine like a temple. It stood, though it had no legs. It breathed, though it had no lungs. And as Rotvar approached it, he realized the shape had no single direction. It changed depending on where he looked. From the left, a tower split in half, its ribs open to the sky. From the right, a stone hand clutching nothing. From directly ahead, a gate, a massive archway, cracked at its apex, humming softly like a wound that had never quite closed. The air around it shimmered not heat, not magic. History. The kind of history that doesn't remember names, only costs. He stepped closer. The ground changed, not color, not shape, sound. The dirt made no sound beneath his feet. His breathing did not echo. Even his heartbeat felt held. The archway loomed, carved in symbols that moved when he looked too long. Spirals, yes, but also straight lines, rigid and cruel, fighting the curves, like boundaries arguing with memory. He placed his hand against the stone. It was cold, but not lifeless. It pulsed once, and he remembered something that had not yet happened. Fire beneath the earth. A room full of mirrors, none reflecting him. A name spoken backwards. Blood that refused to dry. He stepped through. Inside, not a hall, not a space. A field, endless, black grass. Sky full of white ash drifting upward, slow as sleep. At the center of this inner plane, a table, circular, stone. Around it, 7 chairs. Only one was occupied. A woman sat there. Her back to him, braided hair resting between her shoulder blades like twin ropes. She did not turn. "You came faster than expected," she said. Rotvar approached slowly. "I don't know you. You do. You've just never seen me when I wasn't dying." He froze, her voice too familiar. Not in tone, in cadence. "You were at the river," he said. "You held the bundle. I hold many things." She finally turned. Her eyes were pale. Not blind, just exhausted from seeing too much. She gestured to the chair across from her. "Sit or don't. It changes nothing." "But it might change you." He sat. The table between them was carved not with glyphs, not with spirals, with memories. He saw flashes in the grain, a boy chasing crows. A funeral pyre that never caught flame. A blade left in snow. A kiss given before battle, returned only as a whisper. He didn't touch the stone. "Where am I?" he asked. "Nowhere." "When am I?" "Between." She leaned forward. "You carry a weight that has no opposite. Do you know what that means?" Rotvar shook his head. "It means you can't give it away, only give it shape." He frowned. "Why show me this?" She smiled faintly. "Because what comes next doesn't care what you fought, only what you become." "And what is that?" The table pulsed once, a ripple of heat. And the stone itself answered. A name that was never meant to be spoken aloud. Part 15, a name with no breath. The stone table still pulsed. Not in rhythm, but in response. As if it had waited an era to speak that single phrase. A name that was never meant to be spoken aloud. Rotvar leaned back slightly, his shoulders stiff. The woman across from him was no longer looking at him. Her eyes were closed. Her lips moved silently, mouthing a word that refused to become sound. The black grass beyond the circle began to stir. Not with wind, with awareness. Each blade rose straight, drawn toward the table as if by gravity. The white ash in the sky now drifted faster, circling instead of rising. A spiral in the air. "Tell me," Rotvar said. "What name?" The woman did not reply, but the table answered. The stone rippled again, and this time, the carvings across its surface moved. Not symbols, moments. They rearranged. The boy chasing crows vanished. The funeral pyre flared, then died. The kiss reversed itself. And then, from the center, a new image emerged. A cradle. Empty. And around it faces 7. Rotvar recognized none, but he knew them. He had seen them in stories that had never been written. The woman spoke without opening her eyes. "The name cannot be heard, but it can be held." He frowned. "What does that mean?" She opened her eyes. They were bleeding, but not with blood, with ink. Dark threads poured from her tear ducts, coiling on the table before vanishing into its grain. "Every time your line speaks its true name, the world reshapes to forget it," she said. "Why?" "Because the name is a knife, a cut in the fabric. A reminder that the world was never whole." Rotvar stood. "Then why give it to me?" She looked at him, calm. Because you are the only one who still wants to remember what it cost. The ash around them began to descend, not floating, falling, heavy, cold, each flake landing on Rotvar's skin with the weight of memory. The chairs around the table filled, figures, shadowed, unmoving, not alive, not dead, witnesses, and the sky above them cracked not with lightning, but with sound, a low tone long and ancient like a horn blown not by lungs, but by grief itself. The woman stood now. The world will forget again. It always does. I won't, Rotvar said. She smiled. Then you'll be cursed with shape. What kind? The kind that doesn't break, only bends until it remembers what it used to be. Rotvar stepped back from the table. The figures turned their heads toward him. The stone glowed faintly. Then the cradle cracked. A sharp line split it from end to end. From within, a voice began to rise. Not a cry, not a word, just a single note, sung by no throat. And it sounded like the moment before a blade touches skin. The note rose, not music, not scream. A thread between worlds, vibrating in the hollows of the chest. Rotvar felt it travel up his spine like cold breath under armor. His mouth opened not to speak, but to steady himself against the sound. All 7 figures at the table turned toward the cradle. Their eyes glowed faintly, not white, not red, ashen. The cracked cradle pulsed once, then twice, then split open. Not shattered, peeled. Inside, not a child, not a body, but a mask. Rotvar stepped forward. The woman beside the table did not move, but her voice entered the air like wind through old bone. It was never a child. What is it? He asked. The first face they erased. The mask floated slowly out of the cradle. It rotated once in the air, revealing its front. It was blank, but familiar. Not because he recognized it, but because it fit. Perfectly. Too perfectly. He saw for the briefest moment flashes behind his eyes. Himself at a river's edge, blood on his palms, a face buried in frost. His father's hand dropping something into a fire. A scream inside a hall with no roof. The mask hovered toward him and spoke without mouth. I am the name you couldn't say. Rotvar stood still. He did not reach for it. If I wear you, he said, what happens? The mask did not answer. The woman did. You return to the shape the world erased. He nodded. And if I don't? She paused. Then everything that forgot you will remember. Ash now covered the ground entirely. The grass vanished beneath it. The sky had gone still, not silent, just holding its breath. The figures around the table began to hum. Low, united. The note returned, this time in harmony. Rotvar stepped forward, took the mask in both hands. It was heavy, not in mass, but in presence. As if it contained every version of him that hadn't lived. He lifted it toward his face, and then stopped. I will not forget, he said. But I will not vanish to remember. He dropped the mask. It did not fall. It cracked, silently. And from the fracture, light cold, white, and ancient poured out like mist. The sky above them broke into lines, like veins in ice. And all 7 figures shattered into ash. Only the woman remained. She watched without blinking. You've chosen exile, she said. Rotvar turned from her. No. I've chosen to live without forgetting. The mask dissolved on the ground behind him. Its last fragment pulsed once, then dimmed. He walked away from the table, from the cradle, from the field, and the world around him folded. Not collapsed, just let go. When he blinked again, he stood in a clearing. Forest around him. Sky intact, his hands empty. But the mark of the spiral now glowed faintly across his right palm. Burned in, alive, not as a curse, as a reminder. For to see in the place that waited still, the clearing did not move. But it watched. Rotvar stood at its center, breath slow, the spiral burning faintly in his palm. Around him, trees swayed as if greeting a name they had once buried under moss and thunder. The air no longer felt heavy, just aware. Above, the clouds shifted, not with weather, with rhythm. Each gust of wind, each distant bird call, each creak in the branches all moved with the same pulse. He turned once, slowly, The world was still here, but different. Or perhaps it had always been this way, and only now did he know where to look. He left the clearing without a map. His feet did not follow paths. They made them. Each step pressed memory into soil. Not memory of pain or death, but of breath, of presence, of being. By nightfall, he reached a hill. At its peak stood a single standing stone. Weathered by time, wrapped in vines, its spiral barely visible. Someone had once tried to carve over it to hide it. But time had peeled the cover back. He touched it gently. The mark on his palm glowed in response. Not bright, just honest. From the hilltop, he could see far rivers, forests, the gray streak of a distant mountain range. Somewhere beyond them, villages. Names, stories. Some had never heard of him. Some had chosen to forget. Others would invent him anew. He would not correct them. That wasn't his burden. But he would walk. And if ever the ground pulsed too loud, if ever the spirals began to shift again, if ever silence returned with teeth and breathless mouths, he would be there. Not as a hero, not as a god, but as a name that remembered what it meant to be spoken once and not forgotten. And far beneath the soil, something turned, not waking, not sleeping,